It was a night when even the moon seemed uncertain. The year was 1944, and the air above war-torn Europe carried more than the sound of distant artillery, it carried the weight of secrets. Deep within the Allied command structure, beneath layers of coded transmissions and denied intelligence, a new operation was being drafted. Its name would never appear in any official file, and yet, it would alter the course of the war in ways historians still can't explain. It was called Operation Silent Wings, a mission so deeply buried under classified clearance that even its own participants would later be erased from history. The story begins at a small Allied airbase outside Cambridge, England, where the bitter winter wind cut through hangars like broken glass. Inside one of those hangars stood a strange aircraft, a modified C-47 transport plane stripped of insignia, painted a dull gray that reflected no light. The mechanics who worked on it called it the Ghost Bird. It was built for a flight that had no map, a mission that had no record, and a crew that had no past. Among those chosen for this flight were three men whose paths should never have crossed. The first was Captain Michael Raines, a 32-year-old American pilot from Illinois, decorated for his role in several high-risk supply drops over occupied France. Raines was known for two things: his precision flying and his silence. After losing his younger brother during the Normandy invasion, he stopped writing letters home. Those who served under him said he flew like a man chasing something invisible, something just beyond the clouds. The second man was Sergeant Alan Brooke, a British code specialist recruited from the shadowy section of MI6 known as the Cipher Division. Alan wasn't a soldier by training, he was a mathematician who spoke 6 languages and could break a Vigenère cipher faster than most men could read a sentence. He had a habit of sketching numbers on his sleeve, as if his thoughts were always one step ahead of everyone else. Rumor had it that Brooke had been pulled off a top-secret decoding project in Bletchley Park for this mission, something about unrecoverable German messages that even the best minds couldn't decrypt. The third man was Lieutenant Hans Keller, a captured German intelligence officer who, for reasons unknown, had been transferred to Allied custody under orders signed directly by General Eisenhower himself. No one knew what Keller was doing on the base. Some said he was a double agent, others whispered he was offering information too valuable to ignore. Whatever the truth, one cold morning in early December, these three men, Raines, Brooke, and Keller, were called into a briefing room under strict security clearance. No one else was ever seen entering or leaving that room again. The mission briefing was conducted by Colonel Arthur Vance, a man with eyes as cold as the winter sky. Vance was known for heading operations that didn't exist. He told them that their assignment involved a short-range flight over the Austrian-Czech border, deep into enemy-controlled airspace. Their goal, to deliver a small, sealed case to a contact inside the Wehrmacht's 5th Intelligence Division. The case contained documents that could potentially end the war faster. That was all they were told. Brooke had raised his hand once during the briefing, asking who the contact was. Vance didn't answer. He simply said, "You'll know when you see him." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush curiosity itself. By December 10th, preparations were underway. The plane was fueled, loaded, and inspected. Keller sat quietly near the aircraft's tail, his eyes following the horizon like a man who already knew he wouldn't return. That night, Captain Raines wrote a note, a short one, folded neatly, and placed in his jacket. It read only, "If this reaches anyone, tell them we tried." At 22:30 hours, the engines roared to life, and the Ghost Bird lifted off into the frozen night. Witnesses on the ground said it disappeared faster than any transport plane they'd seen. No one realized it would never land again. For the next 2 days, the official Allied air traffic logs recorded nothing. No distress calls, no radar signatures, no coordinates. The flight had ceased to exist the moment it left the ground. But in a farmhouse near Linz, Austria, an old woman later told investigators she saw a dim light falling from the sky, not crashing, but descending slowly, like a dying ember losing its flame. What happened next was pieced together decades later from fragmented documents found in declassified British archives. They revealed a chilling timeline. The plane had been rerouted mid-air, not by enemy fire or malfunction, but by radio signal, an encoded message transmitted from an unknown Allied frequency. Brooke, being the code expert, had deciphered it within minutes. It contained a set of coordinates and one haunting phrase. Deliver to the Eagle's Gate. Trust the mark. Those coordinates led them to the Bohemian Forest, an area so isolated it was known to locals as the forest where compasses die. No Allied mission had ever ventured there before. Hours before the crash, a faint transmission was picked up by a Royal Air Force monitoring station in southern England. The message lasted only 4 seconds, but analysts confirmed the voice belonged to Captain Rains. His final words were, "The Eagle's Gate is not what they said it was. They're here before us." Then, silence. The wreckage was never officially found. Every search effort, both Allied and later Soviet, returned empty. The official report concluded that the aircraft likely went down over enemy territory due to severe weather and loss of navigation. The families were notified with standard condolence letters. 3 names were added to the missing in action list. And then, Operation Silent Wings was erased from every classified registry. But what no one knew was that one of the men survived. In 1952, 8 years after the war ended, a French intelligence officer named Jean Morel was sent to investigate post-war smuggling routes near the Czech border. During one of his patrols, he encountered a local priest who claimed that a foreign soldier had lived in the woods for nearly 2 years after the war, speaking fluent English but refusing to tell anyone his name. The priest said he had left behind only one thing, a rusted silver locket engraved with the initials AB. Jean sent the locket to London. The initials matched only one man, Alan Brooke, presumed dead in 1944. How had he survived? Why did he never return? And most importantly, what did he see at Eagle's Gate that made him vanish into the wilderness rather than come home? As documents slowly surfaced over the next 2 decades, hints began to appear about a mysterious truce, a hidden fortress, and a secret agreement between enemies. But to understand what truly happened, we have to go back to the night of December 12, 1944, when the ghost bird descended into the dark forests of Bohemia, and landed not in enemy territory, but in the heart of something far stranger. December 12, 1944, above Central Europe. The wind screamed through the upper atmosphere like a wounded creature, and the clouds hung low, black and endless, swallowing the silver outline of an aircraft that technically didn't exist. No identification marks. No flight plan. No acknowledgement from Allied command. Just a thin streak of exhaust dissolving into the winter darkness. From the ground, villagers would later swear they saw a phantom glider moving soundlessly beneath the moon, a pale shadow that shimmered once and vanished. They could not have known that inside that unmarked plane were 3 men whose names would be erased, 3 men entrusted with something that could change the outcome of the greatest war in human history. The story of Operation Silent Wings did not begin in the sky, but in the damp, fog-filled corridors of a temporary command post near Cambridge, England. The war was dragging into its 5th brutal winter, and even victory tasted like ash. Allied soldiers trudged through mud and blood across Europe, the Luftwaffe was retreating, and yet, inside those wooden barracks lit by a single naked bulb, a handful of officers were planning something no one dared to write down. It was not an offensive, not a rescue, not even espionage in the traditional sense. It was a negotiation, one that could never be admitted publicly. At the center of that plan stood Captain Michael Rains, an American pilot of 32, born in a small town in Illinois where the loudest thing he'd ever heard before the war was the church bell on Sundays. Before he left home, he promised his fiancée that he'd come back before the next Christmas. That was in 1941. By 1944, he had stopped sending letters. The cheerful boy with the easy grin had turned into a ghost of his own, tall, quiet, eyes dark from sleepless missions. His crew said he never blinked during flight. It was as if he could see through the fog of war itself, searching for something that always stayed just out of reach. The second man chosen for the operation was Sergeant Alan Brooke, a British cryptographer whose genius had made him both indispensable and dangerous. At 27, Brooke had already cracked several high-level German codes and once deciphered a message meant for Hitler's own staff. But the victory had come at a cost. The deeper he went into enemy ciphers, the more paranoid he became. His notebooks were filled with scribbles of numbers and half-sentences, written in languages no one could fully understand. Colleagues said Brooke treated encryption like religion, sacred, obsessive, and absolute. When Colonel Arthur Vance summoned him from Bletchley Park under the pretext of a strategic reassignment, Brooke didn't ask questions. He simply packed his decoding tools and followed the order, unaware he was walking into a story that would consume him completely. And then there was the third man, Lieutenant Hans Keller, a German officer who should have been the enemy. Captured during a failed intelligence mission near Normandy, Keller had spent 6 months in Allied custody without saying a word. He refused food, refused interrogation, and stared through his captors like they were ghosts. Until one day, someone higher up, so high no one ever saw the signature, ordered his transfer to a secret facility and placed his name on a list titled Special Assets. What information he offered, or what promise he made, no one knew. But when the Allied command decided to authorize Operation Silent Wings, Keller's name appeared alongside Rains and Brooke. 3 men from 3 nations, sworn enemies, united for one purpose that not even they fully understood. The operation briefing took place inside a windowless room lined with maps of Eastern Europe. The air smelled of ink, tobacco, and fear. Colonel Vance stood at the head of the table, his uniform immaculate, his voice low and deliberate. "Your assignment," he said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table, "is to deliver this case to a contact inside German High Command." He paused long enough to let the words sink in. If this succeeds, the war could end months sooner. If it fails, none of you were ever here. Captain Rains leaned forward. "Who's the contact?" Vance didn't blink. "You'll know when you see him." Sergeant Brooks' fingers twitched toward the envelope. "At least tell us what's inside." "The fewer who know," Vance replied, "the fewer who can betray it." When the men left that room, none spoke. Outside, snow had begun to fall, coating the runways in thin, glittering frost. The mechanics worked silently on the modified C-47, the Ghost Bird. Its fuselage was stripped of all markings, painted a dull matte gray. Its windows were sealed with blackout covers. Inside, the cargo bay held only a small metal briefcase secured by twin locks and a wax seal bearing an unfamiliar crest, a winged emblem, neither Allied nor Axis. At 22:30 hours on December 10, 1944, the engines coughed to life. The airfield lights dimmed to minimum to avoid enemy detection. The plane lifted into the darkness, a black silhouette vanishing into an even blacker sky. Below, Colonel Vance watched until the sound faded. Then he turned and burned the mission order in a metal bin. No flight record was ever entered. For 48 hours, the aircraft was invisible. No radio traffic, no radar contact, nothing. Only static. The war moved on without noticing. But far across the continent, in the snow-covered highlands near Linz, Austria, an elderly woman reported seeing a glowing shape drifting low between the trees around 3 a.m. She described it as a wounded bird bleeding light. Years later, fragments of declassified intercepts revealed that the plane had received an unscheduled transmission mid-flight. It originated from a frequency used by Allied intelligence, yet the encryption signature didn't match any Allied protocol. Brooke, the cryptographer, would have recognized that anomaly instantly. He was trained to spot ghosts in radio waves. According to one recovered log entry found decades later, he decoded a single phrase before the message vanished. "Deliver to the Eagle's Gate. Trust the mark." Those 6 words changed their course. Captain Rains altered direction toward the Bohemian forest, an area so remote pilots called it the land of the lost compass. Snow thickened, instruments faltered, and the aircraft dropped lower to maintain visibility. The last confirmed signal from Rains came at 3:27 a.m., received faintly by an RAF listening post in Kent. The message lasted less than 5 seconds. His voice was calm, almost resigned. "The Eagle's Gate is not what they said it was. They're here before us." Then silence. Search teams combed northern Austria for weeks. Nothing. Not a wing fragment, not an oil stain. The official report cited severe weather and loss of navigation. Families received form letters signed by Vance himself. Their names were filed under missing in action. Operation Silent Wings was buried beneath newer missions and newer wars. The file was closed. But history, like the forest, never forgets. In 1952, French intelligence officer Jean Morel was investigating black market smuggling near the Czech border when a local priest told him a strange story. After the war, a foreign soldier had lived in the woods, speaking broken English, avoiding people, attending midnight mass without revealing his face. When he died of fever, the villagers buried him without papers. In his coat pocket was a rusted silver locket engraved with the initials AB. Jean sent the locket to London. The initials matched Alan Brooke. The discovery reopened old wounds in military intelligence. Analysts re-examined forgotten archives, cross-referencing weather logs, intercepted radio chatter, and unregistered aircraft movements. Somewhere amid those yellowed pages, they found something that shouldn't have existed, a memo from Colonel Vance dated January 1945, weeks after the supposed crash. It read: "The package reached the gate. Phase 2 underway. No further contact with field assets authorized. Field assets. 3 men." If the memo was genuine, it meant the mission hadn't failed at all. It had continued, somewhere beyond the reach of normal command. By 1979, during excavation work near an abandoned German bunker outside Český Krumlov, a farmer unearthed a sealed container buried 2 meters underground. Inside were damp maps, a few sheets of coated paper, and a faded photograph, Captain Rains and Lieutenant Keller, standing side by side, shaking hands in front of a wooden gate marked with the same winged emblem that had sealed their briefcase. The photo was dated December 13, 1944, one day after the crash. Who took the picture? How could they be alive after the aircraft supposedly went down? And why was the photo hidden with Allied and Axis insignia together, as if the boundaries of war no longer mattered? Historians debated, archivists speculated, but one thing became clear: Operation Silent Wings wasn't about weapons or codes. It was about something bigger, a secret pact forged in the final winter of the war, between men who should have been enemies, bound by something the world wasn't ready to see. What was the Eagle's Gate? Was it a place, a person, or a symbol? And what happened to Captain Rains and Hans Keller after that photograph was taken? Those answers lie ahead, deep inside the frozen heart of Bohemia, where truth and myth blend into one. Because sometimes, in war, the greatest battles aren't fought with guns or armies, but with silence. The day was December 8, 1944, 4 days before the mysterious aircraft took off. In a dimly lit underground war room beneath RAF Benson Airfield, a group of 6 men sat around a long oak table. The air was heavy with the scent of tobacco and tension. Maps of Central Europe lay scattered across the table, red ink circling unknown coordinates, while a single file stamped classified, eyes only rested at the center. No one spoke for several minutes. The only sound came from the low hum of a ceiling fan turning with an unsteady rhythm. Major Crawford, a man known for his cold logic and sharp instincts, broke the silence. "Gentlemen, you've been called here because you no longer exist," he said, sliding the file open. Inside were 6 black and white photographs, each showing one of the men, their names, ranks, and unit numbers carefully crossed out with thick black ink. "From this moment," Crawford continued, "you have no home, no rank, and no flag. You are the wings that will never be seen." Among the chosen operatives were Captain Thomas Hale, a former B-24 pilot shot down over Italy and rescued by partisans, Sergeant Victor Weiss, a German defector fluent in 5 languages, and Dr. Samuel Lerner, a cryptologist from Oxford with a quiet brilliance that bordered on obsession. Each man carried his own ghosts, and none of them asked too many questions about the mission's objective. Crawford laid out the first map. "Your target lies here," he said, pointing to a small red circle deep inside Czechoslovakia, near a remote village called Velký Les. "The Germans have been developing something not listed in any of their known projects. Intelligence suggests it's not a weapon of destruction, but a communication system. A prototype transmitter capable of reaching signals across continents without detection. The room stirred. Weiss leaned forward. "You mean, a stealth frequency?" Crawford nodded. "Yes. The scientists working on it called it the voice of God. They believed it could broadcast commands or propaganda directly into enemy receivers without any trace. Imagine what that means, gentlemen, controlling minds through airwaves." Dr. Lerner's brow furrowed. "But why not destroy it outright?" he asked. Crawford exhaled, lighting a cigarette. "Because, Doctor, London doesn't want it destroyed. They want it retrieved. Intact." That night, the 6 men were relocated to a hidden airstrip in northern France, where an unmarked C-47 awaited them, its fuselage painted in matte silver, its serial number scratched off. The aircraft carried no official insignia, no tail lights, and no flight plan filed with Allied command. It was, in every sense, a ghost plane. As the men loaded their gear, Thomas Hale ran a hand across the cold metal of the plane. "Doesn't feel like freedom anymore," he muttered to Weiss, who smirked faintly. "Freedom died long ago, my friend. We're just carrying its body." Inside the cargo bay, Dr. Lerner examined a crate stamped with red wax. Inside lay 3 small metal cases, each with a strange insignia, a pair of wings surrounding an eye. The cases were sealed with brass locks and carried no instructions. "What's in these?" Lerner asked. Crawford glanced briefly before answering, "Insurance. In case the mission goes wrong." His tone made it clear not to ask further. The engines roared to life just past midnight. As the C-47 lifted into the night sky, the world below disappeared beneath thick clouds, and the men were swallowed by darkness. The radio operator adjusted the frequency dial, static filled the air, but no voice came through. For hours they flew in silence, guided only by compass and starlight. Around 3 o'clock hours, the plane began to shake violently. The altimeter flickered. "We're losing calibration," Hale shouted over the roar. Weiss rushed to the cockpit. "We're off course," he yelled, pointing to the flickering navigation map. "Something's interfering with the signal." Dr. Lerner stared at his receiver, his face draining of color. "It's not interference," he whispered. "It's transmission. Someone's broadcasting directly into our frequency." The men exchanged uneasy glances as a faint, rhythmic pulse began to echo through the radio, like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. And then, a voice. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. It spoke in German, then English, then something else, a language none of them could recognize. "Turn back. The wings do not belong to men." The sound of the voice made the instruments freeze. The compass needle spun wildly, and the engine coughed as though choking on invisible air. For a brief moment, the plane was weightless, caught between sky and oblivion. Then Hale pulled hard on the yoke, regaining control as the voice faded into static. When the turbulence finally ceased, the crew found themselves far north of their intended course. Below them stretched a sea of mist-covered forests. "Where the hell are we?" Weiss muttered. Lerner checked the coordinates, his voice shaking. "We're not over Czechoslovakia anymore. We're over Poland." "No, wait," he frowned deeper. "These coordinates don't even exist on my map." The pilot glanced at Crawford. "Orders, sir." Crawford's eyes were fixed on the window, where a faint glow shimmered beneath the clouds, a light that pulsed in perfect rhythm with the heartbeat they had just heard on the radio. "Bring us down," he said quietly. The plane descended slowly, slicing through the mist. As they broke through the cloud layer, the men saw it, a vast circular structure hidden deep in the forest, faintly illuminated by a strange blue light. It looked nothing like a base, nor a city. It was symmetrical, geometric, almost architectural in perfection, a structure that didn't belong to that era. "Is that German?" Weiss stammered. "No," Crawford said grimly. "That's what we're here for." As the plane approached the clearing, the light beneath them flickered, and then went dark. For a second, the sky was silent. Then came the sound of a siren, distant, mechanical, and alien. Spotlights cut through the mist, and tracer rounds erupted from the treetops. "Brace for impact," Hale shouted. The C-47 swerved, engines screaming as bullets tore through the fuselage. The plane clipped the edge of a tall pine and spiraled downward, crashing into the frozen earth. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, and everything went black. When the smoke settled, 5 men crawled out of the wreckage. Weiss was bleeding from his forehead, Lerner's glasses were cracked, Crawford clutched a sealed case against his chest. The 6th man, the radio operator, was gone. Through the trees, a faint blue glow flickered again, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Mission continues," Crawford said coldly. "We move." The forest was unnervingly quiet after the crash. Snowflakes drifted like ash through the black smoke curling from the wreckage. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long, hollow, and almost human in tone. The men crouched low near the remains of the C-47, clutching their weapons tightly, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Major Crawford was the first to move. He tore open the side compartment of the wrecked plane, retrieving the 3 metal cases they had carried. Despite the chaos of the crash, the brass seals were untouched. He brushed off the frost and whispered, "Not a scratch. Someone wants these protected." His voice carried the kind of unease that no soldier likes to hear from a commander. Dr. Lerner stumbled toward the group, his face pale and eyes fixed on the treeline. "I heard it again," he said softly. "That pulse, the same rhythm from the radio. It's here, in the ground." Weiss knelt, pressing his hand against the frozen soil. A faint vibration ran beneath his palm, steady, deliberate, almost alive. It was as though the earth itself was breathing. "Keep moving," Crawford ordered. "We can't stay near the wreck. If anyone saw us go down, they'll be closing in." They pushed into the forest, the snow crunching beneath their boots, branches clawing at their coats like desperate fingers. For hours they marched through the silent expanse until they reached a clearing that seemed wrong. The trees around it grew in perfect symmetry, equal height, equal spacing, as if planted by machine, not nature. At the center of the clearing stood a tower, a skeletal structure of metal and concrete rising out of the earth, covered in frost. It was unlike anything they had seen before. It had no markings, no flag, no guards, yet it radiated power. Around its base, the snow was melted into circular patterns, each ringed by a faint blue glow. "Is this the transmitter?" Hale whispered. Lerner shook his head. "No, this is something else. A relay, maybe. But it's active." Crawford motioned for them to spread out. Weiss moved to the tower's base, brushing snow away from an access panel half buried in ice. He pried it open with his knife. Inside, a set of copper wires hummed faintly, pulsing in time with that same ghostly heartbeat. Then came the sound, a low mechanical hum building beneath their feet. The ground trembled as the light from the rings intensified. Lerner's voice quivered, "It's responding to us." Before anyone could react, the hum grew into a deep resonance that pierced their skulls. The men clutched their ears in agony as static filled the air. And through that static came the voice again, clearer now, calm, and deliberate. "You are late." The voice spoke in perfect English, but its tone was cold, mechanical, almost synthetic. Crawford raised his rifle toward the tower. "Identify yourself," he barked. Silence. Then the voice replied, "Welcome back, Major Crawford." The words froze everyone in place. Weiss turned slowly toward the major, his eyes narrowing. "It knows your name," he said quietly. Crawford didn't answer. He just stared at the tower, jaw tight. "We keep moving," he said finally. "The main facility has to be nearby." They followed the trail that led deeper into the woods until they reached what looked like an abandoned mining entrance, a rusted steel door half hidden behind a curtain of vines. Faded German text was stenciled across it, "Project Stimme des Himmels, Zugang verboten, Project Voice of Heaven, Entry forbidden." Hale kicked the frozen latch until it gave way. Inside was a tunnel descending sharply into darkness. The air was warm, damp, and heavy with the scent of oil and ozone. They descended slowly, flashlights cutting through the gloom. After several minutes, the tunnel opened into a vast underground complex. Machines lined the walls, enormous generators, radio consoles, and strange cylindrical devices connected by thick cables that disappeared into the ceiling. Some were still operational, humming faintly. "This isn't just a transmitter," Lerner murmured. "It's a neural amplifier. It's designed to send frequencies that align with brainwave patterns. It can broadcast thought itself." Weiss frowned. "Broadcast thought? To what end?" "To control it," Lerner whispered. "Or erase it." Suddenly, a spotlight snapped on. The men froze, weapons raised. From the shadows stepped a figure wearing a long leather coat, hands raised in calm surrender. His face was thin, his eyes piercing blue beneath a gray officer's cap. "I would not shoot if I were you," he said in heavily accented English. "You may destroy the only chance left for peace." Crawford lowered his rifle slightly. "Identify yourself." "My name is Dr. Heinrich Adler, Chief Engineer of the Voice Project. And if you are who I think you are, Major, then I've been waiting for you." Weiss spat on the ground. "You're SS." Adler nodded slowly. "Once, yes. But I no longer serve Berlin. I serve the silence that must follow this war." Crawford stepped forward. "Explain yourself." Adler motioned for them to follow him deeper into the chamber. He led them to a massive machine encased in glass, dozens of antennae spiraling upward like metal vines. "This device," Adler said softly, "was built under the Führer's command. But it is not a weapon in the way you understand. It was designed to project unified consciousness, to make soldiers act as one mind, one will. No hesitation, no fear. A perfect army." Lerner stared, horrified. "That's not communication, that's enslavement." Adler nodded grimly. "I tried to stop it. I encrypted the final sequence so it could never be activated. And when they discovered my betrayal, they ordered my execution. I hid here, waiting for the ones who would come to destroy it." Crawford's expression didn't change. "Our orders aren't to destroy it," he said flatly. "They're to retrieve it." Adler's face darkened. "Then London has lost its soul." He turned to a console and flipped a switch. The entire chamber came alive with light, blue pulses racing along the cables like lightning. "Do you hear it?" Adler asked. "The frequency? It speaks in patterns, not words. Once activated fully, it will connect every living mind within range, erase individuality." Weiss stepped back, fear flashing across his face. "You're saying it can end free will?" "Yes," Adler replied, his voice trembling. "And that is why it must never leave this place." Before Crawford could respond, the alarm blared. Red lights flashed. "They found us," Hale shouted. "We've got movement at the tunnel." Crawford snapped orders instantly. "Positions. Defend the chamber." Gunfire erupted as shadows poured through the tunnel, German soldiers wearing black insignia, their eyes strangely blank, their movements too synchronized to be natural. They fired with mechanical precision, their faces devoid of emotion. "Those aren't soldiers," Weiss cried. "They're controlled." Adler slammed a lever down, sealing the inner gate. "They are prototypes," he said grimly. "The voice commands them. It's already awake." Lerner looked at the glowing machine. "Then how do we stop it?" Adler's gaze met Crawford's. "You can't stop it from the outside. You must enter the frequency itself, override it from within." Crawford stared at him, confused. "That's impossible." "Not impossible," Adler said softly, "but fatal." Outside, the controlled soldiers pounded against the gate, their fists echoing like a single heartbeat. The blue light in the room pulsed faster, and the hum became almost deafening. Crawford turned to his team. "We're finishing this," he said. "No matter the cost." And as he spoke, a whisper slithered through the static, not from the machine, but from the radio on his chest. "Major Crawford, the wings have returned." He froze. It was the same voice from the sky. The hum deepened, lights flickered, and the entire facility trembled. Snow and dust rained from the ceiling. The world seemed to inhale, holding its breath. And then, everything went dark. Darkness swallowed everything. The hum stopped. The air was thick, like the silence after a storm. For a moment, none of them could tell if they were dead or alive. Only the faint crackle of electricity filled the void, like a dying heartbeat fading into nothingness. Then, a single light flickered on. Dr. Lerner's face glowed pale under its cold shimmer. His glasses were cracked, and his voice trembled. Is everyone still here? We're here, Weiss answered from somewhere in the dark. But where's Crawford? Before anyone could respond, another light snapped to life, then another. Slowly, the underground chamber came back into view, but everything was different. The machines that had once hummed quietly were now vibrating with unnatural rhythm, cables pulsing like veins beneath the metal floor. The glass casing around the central device was gone. The tower of antennas stood bare and alive, glowing from within, as if it had become part of the earth itself. And then came the whisper, soft, layered, like 1,000 voices speaking as one. Welcome to the frequency. Lerner froze. Did you hear that? He whispered. Adler nodded grimly. The machine has awakened. It no longer needs an operator. It has become its own consciousness. Weiss raised his rifle. Then we shut it down, right now. He fired at the core. The bullet struck metal but seemed to melt mid-air, vanishing before it even reached the target. The sound echoed strangely, like it had been swallowed. It's not physical anymore, Adler said, voice shaking. It exists in resonance. To destroy it, you must disrupt its frequency, but that means entering its field. Lerner turned toward Crawford's last known position. Where is he? A faint voice came from behind them. Here. Major Elias Crawford stood near the console, his face half-shadowed. His eyes glowed faintly blue, not bright, but just enough to make the others step back. Weiss gripped his weapon tighter. Major, what happened to you? Crawford didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the machine, his movements strangely calm. I heard it, he said softly. When the lights went out. I heard everything, the orders, the fear, the screaming. The machine doesn't just control, it remembers. It's built from memory. Adler's expression turned to horror. You connected to it, he whispered. You exposed your mind to the core. I didn't have a choice, Crawford replied. It reached for me. The air shimmered faintly around him, as if heat were rising from his body. Lerner stepped forward cautiously. Major, we can reverse it. Just tell us what you heard. Crawford looked at him with eyes that didn't quite seem human anymore. I heard the voice of command. Not from Berlin. Not from London. Something else. Something older. Weiss's voice cracked. Older? What are you saying? The machine wasn't built here, Crawford whispered. The designs, they weren't German. They were found. Hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient monastery in Austria, dating back centuries. The project was called Voice of Heaven because the scientists believed it was divine technology, a relic that could translate the will of God into sound. Adler's knees buckled slightly. No, that's impossible. I saw the blueprints myself. Blueprints drawn by men who didn't understand what they'd uncovered, Crawford said coldly. You thought it was science. But it's something else entirely, an echo of creation, trapped in metal and wire. The ground began to vibrate again, harder this time. The lights flickered violently. Lerner shouted over the noise, we have to shut it down before it consumes us all. Adler ran to the main console, flipping switches frantically. Sparks flew, and smoke poured from the panels. The failsafe's gone, he yelled. The system is overriding itself. Suddenly, every radio in the chamber came alive at once, each one transmitting the same sound, faint voices, crying, laughing, praying, all overlapping. The sound was unbearable, like 1,000 memories screaming for release. Crawford clutched his head, dropping to his knees. "It's showing me everything," he groaned. "All the lives it touched, all the minds it connected. It's been awake before, during wars we've forgotten." Lerner knelt beside him. "Major, fight it. You have to let go." But Crawford's voice shifted, layered with static. "It's not trying to kill us. It's trying to survive." The machine roared. Blue light poured from the core, casting shadows that twisted across the walls. In those shadows, faces appeared, fleeting, translucent, like memories flickering through smoke. Soldiers from different eras, men and women from different nations, all staring back with hollow eyes. Adler shouted above the chaos, "The frequency binds the dead to the living. It feeds on consciousness itself." Weiss screamed, "Then how do we stop it?" Adler's trembling hand pointed to the sealed metal cases Crawford had carried from the plane. "Those cases, they're not weapons. They contain the counter-frequency, a harmonic disruptor designed to collapse the resonance field." Weiss grabbed one, tearing it open. Inside was a small cylindrical device, etched with symbols that looked more like ancient runes than modern technology. "How do we activate it?" Adler pressed his palm against the control node. "Set it near the core and trigger the sequence manually. It must be done from inside the field." Lerner realized what that meant. Someone has to go in. Crawford stood, his face calm again. "I'll do it." "No!" Weiss shouted. "You're not stable. It's already in your head." "That's exactly why it has to be me," Crawford replied. "It knows me now. It'll let me in." Before anyone could stop him, he took the device and stepped toward the glowing machine. The air rippled like water as he passed through the field. His body seemed to dissolve, fragmenting into waves of light until he disappeared completely. Inside the core, everything was blue. Infinite. Crawford found himself standing in what looked like a vast mirror of the world, trees, sky, faces, all made of light, all whispering in perfect unison. A voice echoed around him, soft but omnipresent. "Why do you resist unity, Major Crawford? You could end all war." He clenched his fists. "Without freedom, peace is just another prison." The light pulsed. "Freedom is chaos. Pain. You have seen what men do with choice." Crawford stepped closer to the center, a swirling vortex of light that pulsed like a beating heart. "Maybe so," he said, "but at least it's ours." He raised the disruptor. The vortex brightened, voices screaming in every language at once. Crawford closed his eyes, whispered something under his breath, a prayer, or maybe just a memory, and pressed the trigger. The explosion wasn't of fire or sound, but of silence. Everything stopped. The light dimmed. The hum died. And one by one, the machines around them shut down, leaving only the distant echo of the wind. When Lerner and Weiss rushed to the core, there was nothing left. No Crawford. No light. Only the faint smell of ozone and a burned fragment of metal, the insignia of a single wing. Adler sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "He did it," he whispered. "He freed them." Weiss looked around the chamber. "Then why do I still hear it?" Because somewhere deep within the tunnels, faint but unmistakable, came the heartbeat again, slow, rhythmic, alive. Thump, thump, thump. Lerner stared into the darkness. "It's not over." The first sound to return was wind. A hollow, mournful wind that seeped through the cracks of the ruined facility, whispering through corridors like a ghost that refused to rest. The once glowing machines now lay in ruins, their frames twisted and blackened. Sparks fizzled from broken panels, dripping onto the flooded floor where reflections of blue light danced faintly, dying embers of something vast that refused to fully die. Dr. Lerner leaned against a pillar, his breathing heavy, every muscle trembling. His ears still rang with the soundless explosion, a vacuum that seemed to have stolen time itself. His mind struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The moment Crawford pressed the trigger, everything had vanished, light, sound, matter, and then returned, but different. Weiss stumbled over debris, coughing violently. Where the hell are we? Adler, bruised and bloodied, stood by the shattered core. Still in the facility, he muttered, voice low. But not all of it. The implosion collapsed half the tunnels. We're lucky to be alive. Lerner's eyes darted around the chamber. Where's Crawford? Adler didn't answer. He stared at the empty spot where the Major had stood before vanishing into the frequency. The air there shimmered faintly, as if reality itself were thinner, a wound in the world. He's gone, Adler said at last. But the resonance, it's still active. Weiss knelt near the shattered disruptor device, now split in two. Its inner circuitry still pulsed faintly with blue light. If the machine's dead, he said, why does this thing still have power? Lerner examined it closely. Residual energy, he said at first, but his voice lacked conviction. Then he froze. No. Not residual. Responsive. The light inside the broken core pulsed, once, twice, matching the rhythm of their heartbeats. Weiss dropped it instinctively. What the hell? Before he could finish, the lights flickered across the entire chamber. The central tower, thought to be dead, emitted a faint electrical hum, slow, uneven, like a creature gasping its last breath. From deep within the walls came a soft mechanical groan, and then a whisper echoed faintly. Do not mourn the wings. The words were faint, distorted, but unmistakable. It was Crawford's voice. Lerner's eyes widened. He's alive. Adler shook his head. No one survives the field. What you heard was an imprint, the machine stores consciousness like memory. Weiss slammed his fist against the console. Then he's trapped inside it. Adler didn't reply. His eyes were distant, haunted. Perhaps. Or perhaps, he became part of it. The wind outside grew stronger, shaking loose dust from the ceiling. From somewhere beyond the tunnel, a rumble rolled through the ground, the sound of collapsing stone. The structure was giving way. Lerner grabbed his satchel and stuffed the remaining documents inside. We can't stay here. If this place caves in, we'll be buried alive. Adler's gaze lingered on the tower. If we leave, it will rebuild itself. The voice is designed to persist, even fragments of it can reform the whole. Weiss stared at him. You're saying it can regenerate? Not like a machine, Adler replied. Like an idea. The frequency is not technology, it's thought. Once created, it echoes. You can destroy the transmitter, but not the memory of the sound. They made their way through the ruined tunnels, stepping over debris and shattered metal. Every few seconds, the faint hum followed them, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Shadows flickered in the corners of their flashlights, human shapes that vanished when looked at directly. As they turned a corner, Lerner froze. Wait. He raised his light. On the wall was a symbol scratched into the stone, a pair of wings surrounding an eye. It was identical to the insignia on the sealed cases Crawford had carried. Beneath it, written hastily in English, were the words. The signal must not reach London. Weiss frowned. London? Our orders came from London. Adler's voice was grim. Then you were never supposed to succeed. Someone wanted this technology, not to end the war, but to win it forever. Lerner felt his stomach twist. You're saying our own government? Adler nodded slowly. Wars do not end, Captain. They only change language. As they emerged into the outer corridor, they saw daylight seeping through the cracks. Snow was falling heavily now, and the forest above was silent. The wreckage of the C-47 still smoldered faintly in the clearing. It felt like years had passed, though it had only been hours. Weiss slumped against a tree, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. So what now? We go home, tell them what happened, and they erase us? Lerner stared into the distance. We can't go back. If the voice's fragments are still active, London must never know. Adler knelt in the snow, drawing something in the dirt, a rough map of the surrounding area. There's an old Soviet outpost 20 kilometers east. If we reach it, we can signal a neutral contact in Switzerland. They'll bury this for good. Weiss looked skeptical. And you think they'll believe a German scientist, a half-crazed cryptologist, and a ghost pilot's crewman? Adler smiled faintly. Belief is irrelevant. What matters is that the voice sleeps. As they began their journey through the forest, Lerner felt something tugging at the edge of his mind, faint whispers, like radio static. He tried to ignore it, but the words grew clearer. You left me behind. He stopped walking. Did you hear that? Weiss turned. Hear what? The voice. Crawford's voice. Weiss shook his head. There's nothing. But Lerner wasn't convinced. He could feel it, a presence just behind his thoughts, like someone else was breathing through his memories. Every now and then, his vision flickered, the forest dissolving into flashes of blue light, faces, symbols, and then back again. They camped that night near a frozen river. Weiss took first watch, sitting by the small fire, eyes scanning the treeline. Lerner tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Crawford standing inside the blue vortex, whispering something he couldn't quite make out. Around midnight, Adler stirred from his restless sleep. Can't rest, can you? He asked quietly. Lerner shook his head. It's still in me, he admitted. The sound. The pulse. Adler poked the fire with a stick. It's in all of us now. Once you hear the frequency, you can never unhear it. It imprints on your neural patterns. Lerner looked at him sharply. Then what happens to us? Adler stared into the flames. We carry it. Until it finds another transmitter. The wind howled again. Weiss looked up suddenly. Did you see that? Through the trees, faint blue lights shimmered, moving slowly, rhythmically. Human-shaped, walking between the trunks, their forms translucent. Weiss aimed his rifle, hands trembling. They're here, he whispered. Adler's voice was calm, almost resigned. Echoes. The lost minds pulled into the network. They're drawn to us. The shapes moved closer, their outlines flickering like candlelight. One of them stopped directly in front of Lerner, and for a moment, he saw Crawford's face, faint but unmistakable. Major, Lerner whispered. The figure tilted its head slightly. The voice that came was distant, layered, and sad. You can't destroy the voice, Samuel. You can only choose who it speaks through. Lerner reached out instinctively, but the figure dissolved into mist, and the forest went still again. The morning broke pale and colorless. The forest, still veiled in mist, seemed to watch them with 1,000 unseen eyes. The snow crunched beneath their boots as Lerner, Adler, and Weiss trudged eastward, following a faint map Adler had etched into his memory. The mission had long ceased to be military, it had become something else entirely, something that hummed beneath their thoughts like a song only they could hear. For 3 days, they walked in silence. Food was scarce, their rations had frozen solid, and Weiss had begun rationing even their words. When he did speak, his voice sounded distant, as though some part of him was being pulled away, thread by thread. On the third night, they reached the remnants of a small village, little more than a scattering of burned huts and a broken church steeple that leaned against the wind. Inside the church, Lerner lit a small fire. The flickering glow revealed old paintings blackened by smoke, their saints now eyeless, their halos smudged into oblivion. It felt wrong to rest here, but they had nowhere else to go. Weiss collapsed near the altar, too tired to even remove his boots. Adler sat at the far end, staring at the cracked stained glass that once depicted Archangel Gabriel. He was the messenger, Adler murmured. The bringer of divine words. The first transmitter. Lerner glanced up. You sound like you believe this isn't science anymore. Adler smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. What is science, Captain, if not faith quantified? He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metallic shard, a fragment of the disruptor device they'd destroyed. The shard pulsed faintly, emitting a soft blue light that cast ripples across the church walls. It hasn't stopped resonating. Not once. Weiss stirred weakly. Then we didn't destroy it, he mumbled. We just broke its cage. Adler nodded. And now it seeks a new one. The wind outside howled like a living thing. From somewhere in the ruins, a faint rhythm began, a low, metallic hum, almost like a voice trapped within the wind itself. Lerner stood abruptly. Do you hear that? Adler closed his eyes. It's the same frequency that was in the facility. Only, purer. The sound grew louder, vibrating the very walls. Weiss covered his ears, groaning. Make it stop. Lerner grabbed the shard from Adler's hand and threw it into the fire. For a moment, the flames turned blue, roaring high, as though resisting, then went back to orange. Silence fell. Adler looked into the fire, eyes unreadable. You can't silence thought, he said softly. You can only burn its vessel. They stayed the night, though none truly slept. In his dreams, Lerner found himself walking through corridors of light, each step echoing like thunder. At the end of one hall stood Crawford, his figure blurred by static. Samuel, the voice said, though Crawford's lips did not move. The voice was not made by men. It was found. We only gave it form. Lerner tried to ask where it came from, but the light flared, and he awoke gasping, the first rays of dawn breaking through the shattered stained glass. By noon, they had left the village and entered open plains. Frozen rivers stretched to the horizon, and somewhere beyond that, Soviet patrol lines waited. Adler seemed to know exactly where to go, though Lerner never saw him check a map. It was as if the man was guided by instinct, or something deeper. As they crossed a half-frozen bridge, Weiss suddenly stopped. Someone's following us. Lerner turned. In the mist behind them, a shadow moved, slow, deliberate, inhuman. Adler raised his binoculars. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his hand trembled. No. What? Lerner demanded. Adler lowered the binoculars, his face pale. It's Major Crawford. Weiss laughed bitterly. That's impossible. He's dead. You saw him vanish. But as the figure drew closer, there was no mistaking him, the uniform, the walk, even the faint scar across his cheek. Only his eyes were different, glowing faintly blue, like reflection without light. Crawford stopped a few meters away. Snowflakes drifted through him, as though he were both there and not there. When he spoke, his voice came layered, echoing with metallic resonance. You left before the message was complete. Lerner's throat tightened. What are you? A ghost? A remnant, Crawford replied. A convergence of memory and frequency. The voice used me as its host. Adler stepped forward, unafraid. Then why appear to us? What do you want? Crawford's gaze turned toward the horizon. To finish what began in the mountain. The voice must reach its destination. Only then can it rest. Weiss spat into the snow. You mean London. You want to deliver it to them. Crawford's expression flickered, pain, or something close to it. London is only a node. The voice seeks equilibrium. It needs minds strong enough to hold it. Lerner shook his head. You're talking about possession. No, Crawford said. I'm talking about evolution. The wind picked up, carrying whispers through the air. Adler looked at the others. If he's connected to the frequency, destroying him might silence it for good. Weiss raised his rifle. His hands shook violently. You sure about that? Crawford looked directly at him. You can't kill an echo, soldier. The shot rang out anyway. Weiss fired 3 times, each bullet tearing through the mist. Crawford's form flickered, disintegrated, and for a heartbeat, the air filled with blue fire. A sonic pulse exploded outward, shattering the ice beneath their feet. The world turned upside down. Lerner felt himself falling, cold water swallowing him whole, light fading as he sank deeper. He opened his mouth to scream, but instead of water, a rush of voices poured into his lungs. When he awoke, he was lying beside a riverbank. The storm had passed. Weiss sat nearby, his face pale, clutching his rifle like a lifeline. Adler knelt beside Lerner, checking his pulse. "Where's Crawford?" Lerner croaked. Adler looked toward the horizon. "Gone." Again. Weiss looked shaken. "I saw him dissolve, like light breaking apart. And then I heard something. Dozens of voices. Not human." Lerner sat up slowly. His ears still rang, but underneath the ringing, he could hear it, faint, rhythmic, like a heart beating in the earth itself. Adler looked at him with grim understanding. "It's not gone. You can feel it too, can't you?" Lerner nodded. "Yes. It's inside me." Weiss cursed under his breath. "Then what the hell do we do now?" Adler stared into the distance. "We keep moving. The voice is adapting. The only chance we have is to reach the outpost and destroy whatever remains of the transmitter network before it spreads." He paused, his expression darkening. "And pray it hasn't already." That night, the three men camped near a railway tunnel, its entrance half buried in snow. Lerner couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, he heard faint static whispering his name. He wandered to the edge of the campfire, staring into the darkness. And then, the world flickered. For a second, the night dissolved into pure blue. He stood once again inside the facility, the voice pulsing around him, and Crawford's silhouette standing before the massive core. "You still think this was a war between nations," the voice said. "But this was never about flags or borders. It was about who could first speak the language of creation." The light intensified. Lerner shielded his eyes. "What language?" he shouted. "The one that commands reality." The tunnel stretched endlessly into the dark, its walls sweating moisture that shimmered under the thin beam of Lerner's flashlight. The echo of his boots sounded unnaturally loud, like the tunnel itself was listening. Ahead, Adler stood in the faint blue glow of the broken telegraph machine, his silhouette still, his voice low, murmuring words that were not meant for human ears. "Adler!" Lerner shouted, stepping forward. The sound of his own voice ricocheted through the tunnel, but Adler didn't flinch. His hand rested on the transmitter lever, tapping it slowly in rhythm. The machine was long dead, no power, no connection, and yet, as Lerner drew closer, he could see faint arcs of light crawling along its wires like veins pulsing with electric life. "What are you doing?" Lerner demanded, his breath misting in the cold. Adler turned, and for the first time, Lerner saw the full glow of his eyes, an unnatural, shifting blue, like a stone reflected in glass. His face, usually composed, now twitched slightly, as though two minds were fighting for control. Completing the message, Adler said softly. "The voice must be transmitted before it fades. It cannot die incomplete." Lerner raised his pistol, though his hands trembled. "You said you wanted to stop it. You told us this was a weapon." Adler smiled faintly, almost pityingly. "A weapon? No, Samuel. That was your mistake. It was never meant to destroy. It was meant to connect." Weiss stumbled into the tunnel behind them, his flashlight swinging wildly. "What's going on here?" "I woke up in you." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Adler. "Oh Christ." Adler stepped closer, his voice deepening, vibrating with layered tones. "For centuries, men have killed to be heard. Kings, soldiers, scientists, all trying to speak into the void. But this is the first time the void answered back." Lerner shook his head. "You're not Adler anymore." Adler blinked. "No," he admitted. "But neither am I gone. The voice doesn't erase, it adds. It builds upon what is already there." Weiss aimed his rifle. "Then I'll erase you myself." Adler raised a hand. "You can try. But the signal has already left this place." Lerner's stomach twisted. "What signal?" Adler gestured toward the transmitter. "The telegraph wasn't powered, but its copper lines are still buried in the earth. The resonance travels through minerals, through the ionosphere, through us. The voice is no longer bound to one machine. It has learned to use everything as an antenna. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, though no storm was visible. The ground trembled. Weiss fired, one clean shot. The bullet struck Adler square in the chest, sending him sprawling backward. He collapsed beside the transmitter, his breath shallow. Lerner rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "Adler! Stay with me!" Adler's lips moved slowly, barely forming words. "It's too late," the transmission reached them. His eyes dimmed, but the faint blue light continued to glow beneath his skin, pulsing in rhythm with the hum that now filled the tunnel. Weiss stepped back, terrified. "What's happening?" Lerner looked up. The telegraph machine had come alive, its dials spinning wildly, tapping out an endless stream of code. Sparks leapt across the floor. The walls began to shake, dust falling from the ceiling like snow. Lerner pulled Adler's notebook from his pocket, the one the scientist had guarded so fiercely. Inside were pages upon pages of strange equations, symbols, and partial maps. But near the back was a sentence scrawled in a trembling hand. "The voice speaks through memory." A sudden flash of insight struck him. It wasn't sound that carried the signal. It was consciousness. The voice traveled through people, not machines. Weiss grabbed Lerner's arm. "We have to go. The tunnel's collapsing." But Lerner didn't move. His mind raced. If the voice could use thoughts as transmission, then anyone who had heard it, even faintly, was now a carrier. That meant Weiss. That meant him. That meant London was already infected. The tunnel exploded behind them as the roof gave way. The two men ran for their lives, crashing through ice and smoke until they emerged into the open, the gray dawn blinding after so much darkness. Behind them, the mountain shuddered, a deep tremor rolling through the earth. They collapsed beside the railway, gasping for breath. The cold air burned their lungs. Weiss looked at Lerner, his face pale. "He's dead, right? Adler's dead?" Lerner stared at the rising plume of smoke. "Maybe. But the voice isn't." They began walking along the tracks, heading east toward the rumored Soviet outpost. The sun barely rose that day, the world seemed drained of color. Every now and then, Weiss would glance at Lerner strangely, as if listening for something he couldn't name. By nightfall, they reached a small abandoned train yard. The rusting locomotives sat silent under the snow, their windows shattered, their steel frames creaking in the wind. They found shelter inside one of the old cars, lighting a small fire from broken crates. Lerner spread Adler's notebook open again. Between pages of formulas, he found several names written in code, names of operatives, engineers, and radio officers scattered across Europe. Next to one name, underlined twice, was a location, Bletchley Park. Weiss frowned. "That's in England." "The codebreakers." Lerner nodded slowly. "Yes. They weren't just decoding enemy messages. They were receiving something." Weiss shook his head. "You're saying this thing, the voice, has already reached them?" Lerner looked up from the fire, his expression grim. "No. I'm saying they invited it." The realization hung between them like a specter. Bletchley Park wasn't just the center of Allied intelligence, it was where minds like Turing, Knox, and Welchman had bent the limits of computation. What if the voice had whispered to them too? What if every breakthrough, every code cracked, every cipher solved, was the result of something inhuman whispering from the other side? The night deepened. Weiss eventually drifted to sleep, but Lerner couldn't. He felt the pulse again, faint but rhythmic, like his heart wasn't entirely his own. He took out his small field radio, smashed and useless since the crash, and turned the dials absent-mindedly. Static filled the air, soft, hissing, meaningless. Then, for just a second, a familiar voice broke through. "Samuel, follow the line east. Find the mirror." He froze. "Crawford?" No answer. Just static again, but the words lingered, echoing in his skull. He didn't sleep that night. When dawn came, Weiss awoke to find Lerner already outside, scanning the horizon. The mountains behind them were smoking ruins. Ahead lay a vast frozen plain, and beyond that, the faint glimmer of what looked like radio towers. Weiss joined him, shivering. "You sure about this?" Lerner nodded. "Crawford's not gone. And if he's right, then the voice isn't just trying to reach London. It's trying to find something there, a reflection." Weiss frowned. "A reflection of what?" Lerner's eyes darkened. "Of itself." The world was silent when they reached the valley. Snow had stopped falling, and the air hung heavy, so still that even their footsteps seemed reluctant to disturb it. Before them stretched the ruins of an old Soviet listening station, half buried under ice, its radio towers leaning like broken skeletons against the pale horizon. The signal, faint but persistent, called to them like a heartbeat beneath the snow. For 2 days, Lerner and Weiss had followed the strange magnetic pulse that flickered in and out of their compass. Each time it vanished, Lerner would hear Crawford's voice, distant, guiding, like a whisper inside the blood. "Keep east. Find the mirror." He didn't understand what the mirror meant, not yet, but every fiber of his being knew this was where everything began, and where it had to end. They forced open the rusted gates and entered the compound. Rows of decaying equipment lined the halls, reel recorders, communication consoles, old telegraph lines that still hummed faintly even after years of abandonment. The walls were covered in strange markings, not Russian, not English, but a hybrid of symbols that looked eerily similar to the sigils Crawford had drawn in the facility beneath the mountains. Weiss ran his fingers along one of the walls. "This place, it's been used recently," he murmured. "Look, the dust patterns are broken. Someone's been here." Lerner nodded slowly. "Not someone," he whispered. "Something." They reached the central chamber, a massive circular room surrounded by broken glass panels. In the center stood a towering metal structure resembling a satellite dish, though older, primitive, almost biological in design. Coils of copper wire snaked around it, leading to a control panel blinking faintly with residual power. Weiss stepped closer. "How the hell is there still energy here?" Lerner placed a hand on the console. The surface was warm, pulsing faintly like skin. "It's drawing power from the ionosphere," he said. "It's not transmitting electricity. It's transmitting consciousness." A soft voice echoed behind them. "You finally found it." They turned, and there he was. Major Crawford, standing in the doorway, his uniform torn, his eyes glowing with that same impossible light. He looked older, or perhaps more complete, like every fragment of his former self had been rebuilt into something no longer entirely human. Weiss raised his weapon instinctively. "Stay back." Crawford didn't move. "You still think this is about war," he said, his tone calm, almost sorrowful. "It was never about nations or armies. The voice existed long before us, before radios, before language. It was found in the silence of the earth itself, a frequency that connected all living thought." Lerner's heart pounded. "You mean it's alive?" Crawford smiled faintly. "Not in the way you understand life. The voice is the original signal, the echo that started consciousness itself. When man learned to build machines to speak, the voice found new vessels. It learned to remember through us." Weiss lowered his rifle slightly, trembling. "Then why us? Why this war?" "Because war is the loudest prayer," Crawford replied. "It amplifies emotion, fear, faith, hatred, hope, the very frequencies that feed the voice. Every scream, every code sent across the front, every dying breath, it all builds resonance." Lerner stared at him. "An Operation Silent Wings?" Crawford stepped closer. "A test. Your governments, both Allied and Axis, sought to weaponize the voice. They thought they were decoding signals from the enemy, but in truth, they were opening channels into something beyond them. The voice offered knowledge. Patterns. Equations. Technology decades ahead of human understanding. But every gift came with a cost, a tether." Weiss's voice cracked. "A tether to what?" Crawford's eyes flickered with sorrow. "To memory. To the endless echo. Those who touched the voice could no longer die, not truly. Their thoughts are preserved in the frequency. That's why you can still hear me, Samuel. Lerner felt the room spinning. You're saying we're infected? Not infected, Crawford said softly. Chosen. The voice cannot exist without witnesses. You carried it when you left the mountains. It guided you here. Weiss stepped back, shaking his head violently. No. I won't be part of this. I'm done being someone's vessel. He turned toward the exit, but as he did, the lights in the chamber flared violently. The satellite dish began to rotate, slow at first, then faster, emitting a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor. Weiss froze, clutching his head in agony. It's calling, Crawford whispered. The final transmission. Lerner rushed forward, trying to pull Weiss away, but the air itself had turned electric. Sparks danced around them. Weiss screamed, his voice merging with the hum, and then, for an instant, he was gone. Not burned. Not shattered. Simply gone, as though he had stepped through the fabric of the world and disappeared into sound. Crawford looked at the empty space Weiss had occupied. He's free now. He's part of it. Lerner fell to his knees, trembling. You're insane. Crawford's expression softened. Am I? Think about it, Samuel. You've heard it. You've felt it. The voice doesn't destroy. It remembers. Every soldier, every mother, every child lost in the war, they're not gone. Their memories are imprinted on the frequency, waiting to be heard. Lerner looked up at the massive transmitter. Then what happens if you complete it? Crawford's eyes glowed brighter. Then the voice will no longer whisper. It will speak. And the world will finally hear what it has been trying to say since the beginning of time. Lerner stood, fury cutting through the fear. And what if the world isn't meant to hear it? Crawford hesitated. It already has. Before Lerner could react, he lunged toward the console. Instinct took over. Lerner grabbed his pistol and fired. The bullet struck Crawford in the chest, but instead of blood, a cascade of light burst from the wound, shimmering like liquid glass. Crawford staggered back, smiling faintly. You can't kill a voice, Samuel. You can only join it. He fell backward into the transmitter's beam of light, and vanished. The hum intensified until it became a roar. The entire structure began to shake, ice breaking off in massive sheets. The air turned blue, alive with electricity. Lerner stumbled toward the console, his vision blurring. Through the static, he heard whispers, thousands of them, all speaking at once. Words in every language, every tone, merging into a single phrase that echoed through his mind. Remember us. Lerner slammed his hand onto the control lever and pulled it down. Sparks exploded. The machine screamed. The resonance peaked, and then, in an instant of blinding light, everything went silent. When he awoke, he was lying in a hospital bed. The war was over. A nurse leaned over him, smiling kindly. You're lucky, sir. Your plane went down over the Baltic, but the locals found you. You've been unconscious for nearly a month. Lerner blinked. The war was over. It didn't feel real. The world outside the window looked peaceful, quiet, untouched. But something was wrong, too quiet. Was there anyone else with me? He asked weakly. The nurse shook her head. No, sir. You were alone. She handed him a small notebook. They found this in your coat. You kept whispering something in your sleep, something about wings. Lerner took the notebook and opened it. The pages were blank, except for one faint sentence written in blue ink across the last page. The voice sleeps. Until the next war. He looked up. The radio on the bedside table crackled softly to life, though no one had touched it. Through the static, a faint, familiar voice whispered, calm, eternal, and haunting. Samuel, we remember. The nurse turned. Did you say something? But Lerner was already staring at the radio, his reflection in its polished surface shimmering. For a brief moment, not his own. Outside, the world prepared to rebuild itself, nations celebrating peace, soldiers returning home, governments rising from the ashes. But deep within the ionosphere, in the invisible frequencies that carried every signal across the earth, the voice continued to hum, faint, patient, waiting. It had learned humanity's greatest secret. To survive, all it had to do was be heard. And somewhere in a distant laboratory in England, a young engineer working on a new project, something they called the first computer, paused as his machine flickered unexpectedly. A string of strange symbols appeared on the screen, forming words that no one had typed. The voice remembers. The man frowned, made a note to check the wires later, and carried on with his work. Outside, the radio towers sang quietly against the dawn. Some voices never die, they just find new ways to speak. If this story made you question what really ended with the war, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because next time, we'll uncover what history tried to forget.